2 weeks ago, Dawkins was at the Enmore Theater. But how they put that thing together and the names that they get, it's very impressive. I'm glad Australia has something like that.
Yeah, totally.
Because when you were opening for Dr. Cornel West, it was you, and then there was a Aboriginal woman in between.
Mm-hmm.
And that was, because September will be 5 years from me now in Australia. That was probably, do you remember that, maybe 3 or 2.5 years ago?
Yeah, probably 3, I think.
And that sort of set up, like, the message everybody was saying. And it was interesting to see because coming from Northeast Ohio, my background, you know, Youngstown, we didn't know it, we only had white or black.
Right.
And it was never an issue. There was no color. It was just, that's all we had known. I didn't see any sort of like narrow-minded, closed-minded thought processes about people's skin until I moved to California.
Interesting.
Yeah, and I tell people that, and people think of Ohio, they think farms, which is true, but I just come from an old steel town, which is an old, you know, it's that mindset of like, we're just trying to eat.
Everyone's working the same jobs.
Yet, all immigrants as well. Like my family immigrated from Italy, and then you see a lot of Greek descent. And there was never, I guess nobody had money. I always equate money to kind of like people who have closed off opinions about people. I always say we were too hungry to worry about skin color, man.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
Yeah, I think to be able to kind of separate race from class is very difficult. You know what I mean? Like to separate those conversations. Yeah, in Australia, like you say, you know, seeing something like that, where in Australia we have the unique situation where blackness is equivalent to indigeneity, whereas in the States it's not necessarily that. So, you know, Aboriginal people being black in Australia and in their own, you know, fight for civil rights in Australia, it's aligned with African American, you know, like opinion or an African American movement. In many ways, as well as the Indigenous American movement. So it's a unique situation that we're in, which is.
And you grew up in Australia, correct?
Yeah. I was born in Brisbane.
And you were born in Brisbane, and you're from Rhodes.
Yeah, man.
I thought, like I said, man, I lived with an amazing Greek family for 4 years. My first 4 years in Australia, and I've seen the islands. It's the northern, because I wanted to talk about what you got going on. There's a lot to talk about, but one of the things you got going on the end of September is the I put it in my notes, the Rhodes Poetry Retreat. I was reading about that.
It's crazy.
And it's kind of like, now, you know, cut me off if I'm wrong, but what you're doing with that. And guys listening, I'm going to leave the links in the show notes as well, where you could find Luka and where you could find the RhodesPoetryRetreat.com. That'll be in the show notes. But what I was reading about it is kind of like like your body of work, everything that you've done, like your studies, you're a teacher. That's another thing before we even get to that. When I'm telling people on my Snapchat and social medias about you, and you know, if you Google your name, it says Australian poet and you know, rapper of Greek heritage, but you're a teacher. I've actually done one of your poetry workshops when you were teaching how to tell stories. You're a storyteller. If somebody was like, you know, Luka, what do you do? What do you say?
Oh man, I just say poet and stay humble, man.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like this.
Poet and stay humble.
I'm just like, you know, what can you say? You know, like, what do you do? I'm a poet.
Who were you reading when you were younger? Like, what sort of?
My mum, actually, interestingly, for a very open-minded Greek-Australian mother, gave me a copy of the Tao Te Ching when I was a kid, which is a Taoist text by Lao Tzu, which is like a series of poems that are just numbered. And I distinctly remember number 6. It's my favorite number. It's my birthday. And it talks about how the thing that makes the window work is the fact that it is nothing. The thing that makes the spokes in a wheel work is the empty space, you know? The thing that makes a jar or a cup work is the emptiness, so that it can hold something. So this idea of it being the negative space in life that can actually be really important, the silence and the quiet and or
the adversity that people take, because the window thing is, I've never heard that, but you just have me thinking now, because in one of the poems that really resonated with me, that I've kept with me, that I listened to, is the, you know, I was playing for him when you were at the coffee shop getting coffee. I was staying there with the phone because I had sent him Antidote, but it was Please Resist Me. And it was like, when I saw you performing it a few years back, and then when I read it, and then you saying the window, the thing that makes the window work, is the, you know, the empty space. In that poem, you're focusing on the adversity, but you're not allowing the adversity for the reader and probably yourself to define who you are. Because you say, you know, please resist me because that resistance brings upon my evolution.
Yeah,
And
what
so-
doesn't kill me makes me stronger, basically, in a different way. And yeah, I guess similar to what a great poet Khalil Gibran says in his book, The Prophet, he talks about joy. And he says that if we see ourselves as like a block of clay, say, it is the trauma and the pain that we've been through that carves us out. And the deeper the carving, the more trauma we've been through, the more joy can be poured into that cup. So like you're saying, that negative space,
Yeah.
you know, the deeper that negative space, the deeper that scar, the greater the healing, or the greater the lesson, or the greater the joy that can be appreciated off the back of that.
The message
Yeah.
that you deliver. How old were you when you had the confidence to, you know, call it performing, call it standing in front of people, because I know people who write, and I'm friends with writers, and it's almost like if they don't always feel comfortable allowing people inside. Yours is almost yours is like a collective dance with your audience, and it's very captivating. And it has me think. The reason why I took that, you know, signed up for your workshop probably a year and a half ago. I'm bad with dates. You know, I live in a vacuum. You know, I'm so focused on what I'm doing.
Whenever it was.
Yes, because of the storytelling aspect. I'm like, I could learn from anyone, but specifically one. You know, you were talking about when you were telling the story, you create illustrations. One of the examples you used in that workshop was a tree. You were telling a story about a tree. I think it was whatever that had been. How were you doing that? Like since you can remember?
No, I'm an interesting beast, man. It was hip hop that made me fall in love with words, man.
Hip hop.
It was rap. It was like.
Was it a specific rapper?
It was like, actually, it was a specific song that I can't say it made me go, that's it, I want to be a rapper. But it made me go, holy shit, you know, like, I can learn something through someone's song, you know, that idea of edutainment, that old KRS-One perspective. But it was Tupac's Brenda's Got a Baby.
Yes.
For me, that song was like, wow, I had no idea what teen pregnancy was, you know,
Right.
at my age. And I had no idea what poverty could do, you know, to people and to communities in that sense. And, you know, from 3 minutes 30 for the start to finish of that song, I learned something. And I had a poster of Tupac on my wall growing up, a quote from one of his books, from his book of poetry, Rose That Grew From Concrete. There's a poem in there called In the Event of My Demise, and I had a quote of it on my wall growing up. In the event of my demise, when I should live no more, I hope I die for a principle or a belief that I live for. And this was just after he'd passed away, when he got even more famous, unfortunately, as many artists do. So yeah, that was kind of the beginning for me, and I didn't think I want to be a rapper or a poet, but I was always confident. I'm not going to lie that I was the shy kid, I wasn't. But being a performance poet is kind of like signing up for a bit of a very dichotomous, you know, life, because we are so insular, and you know, we need that quiet time to be able to write and reflect, and to, you know, just be alone with our thoughts and wrestle with our emotions and be fully introverted. And then, you know, I guess during the process of memorizing that poem, I become an extrovert, and all of a sudden I go from this really vulnerable state of being by myself and sharing my deepest truths to being, you know, the most extroverted entertainer guy on stage, telling everybody these things about myself or about society. So it is a pretty interesting thing to do, and not everybody can do it. And I don't think that that's necessarily a bad thing. I think some people are really meant to be at home writing books, not leaving the house very often, and producing incredible things that go out to the world in that form. And other people are meant to be touring artists, and some artists are such great performers they don't actually write their work. I'm in love with doing both, you know, and I think it's a big part of
what makes, you know, who you are. It's that passion. You referenced Pac, and in just the last podcast we did, we were talking about that book of poetry specifically. For me, when I was a kid with him, because I also have a joint admiration for him as a activist, what he stood for, how young he was in the mark and movement that he had created. And it's kind of sad though, because just the other day I was talking to my buddy about, like, could you imagine him at 48? He was writing these songs about, you know, because he was still young and he was hanging out, he was living the life, but he had that, he was still mature enough to understand that you shouldn't, you know, hit women, you shouldn't treat people this way, and he was still a kid. I mean, he died in his 20s. To see what he would have been like as a 40-year-old or a 50-year-old,
yeah, it would have been interesting.
Powerful.
I would love to think that he would be someone like a Common type character today. I think Common's gone from strength to strength, and I actually love him
The
more
Light is
now.
one of my favorite songs of all time.
Yeah, I love him more now than ever. I think his activism's come to the fore, and his artistry's come to the fore, and I can see that he's working from the heart, and he's just doing what he feels like he wants to do. And the reason why Puck, I think, is so powerful is because he was a open, absolutely ridiculously public, complete contradiction, as most of us are and fail to admit. We tend to love to point the finger at other people, but Puck showed us that, you know, he was, you know, from the street, or he did love women, or he, you know, like he was a product of his time as a misogynist in his own way. And he was intellectual and spiritually developed enough and politically aware enough to question himself.
It was like he almost knew.
And to point the finger in on himself and know that he was doing the wrong thing in certain points, and write about that too, or from that perspective. A really unique character, and yeah, it's really amazing that now I go to schools, man, and literally I can be talking.
Do they know about him?
Man, I talk to a year 8 class. They're like, "Who influenced you?" I'm like, "Tupac." They're like, "Yeah."
Okay, good.
It's crazy, man.
Yeah, it's good.
That's like 20 years ago. You know?
It's
like
good,
they
man.
weren't born when he died.
Yeah,
you know?
that's the power.
It's
in
crazy.
You mentioned about how like he was able to pull from the heart, the spirit, and it's similar to like your lyrics, how you write, how you perform. When you're like maybe, you know, meeting other performers, or maybe you're collabing or doing these workshops, you probably have a good skill of being able to tell if somebody's holding back. Like, do you know what I mean?
Yeah, there's a
You're able to
massive
identify.
Yeah, a massive part of what I do is reading the room. You know, like reading the energy and the personalities in a room, and facilitating a workshop according to what's going on in the room. It's a big part of what I do. I appreciate that you call me a teacher. I haven't got a teaching degree, but it is a really, you know, it is a huge part of what I do, and I love it a lot. Yeah, and you can never predict, you know, I think a lot of teachers, or a lot of people in general, we preempt what we think people are capable of. But when I go to schools or I connect in public workshops and you see like a 12-year-old channel some crazy poetry, you're just like, man, I don't know if, you know, the ancient Greeks didn't believe they could own their inspiration. You could never claim it because it was a spirit that came through you. You couldn't. If it was shit, it wasn't your fault. And if it was good, you couldn't get an ego about it. You know? The muse just wasn't, you know.
That's fascinating. I've
heard
heard
the point of that moment.
I've heard philosophers talk about that creativity. Like, the thing that blows my mind is like a Musk. He's 9 years old and he knows how to develop and write computer programs when computers really weren't a thing. Or that poet or that performer, or Tupac, who we keep talking about. It's almost like they've dialed into like a frequency, or they're connected to something and they're receiving something from something else.
Yeah.
That's how I'm starting to flirt with like where creativity is, because, you know, like writing is one of my favorite things to do, and then also prepping for this as well, and then coaching. So I have little tasks that I'll do if I feel like, you know, kind of to help me with creativity. Like, have you done sensory deprivation before? Have you gotten in a float tank?
I haven't gotten in a float tank, but I have been offered that. I often tour to Wollongong, and there's a woman out there that has a thing, and she keeps messaging me, and I apologize to her if she's listening to this, because I just never have the time to jump in and do that.
Yeah, I'll send you some info on it. Just the power, just how it was created, who created it, who was a scientist. He was trying to help out cancer patients.
Right.
If, you know, the chemo was killing them, and this was in the 60s, Dr. John C. Lilly, and he found that he created the tank to strip our bodies of our senses, sight, touch, taste, hear, and smell. And then what happens is you trick your body of not needing it.
Right.
So the external stimulus is switched off, and your consciousness goes somewhere else. Yeah. So I use it as like
it's kind of like intermittent fasting. Like, it's kind of like the same idea around fasting. Like, we fast
long term.
So our bodies.
Do you fast?
Sometimes, yeah. So our bodies end up, because we spend so much energy consuming and you know, our stomachs digesting things and sending those nutrients around the body, or dealing with toxins in the body. So if you take that out, I mean, this is my understanding of it, especially when it comes to like 40-day fasts. Interesting fact, Pythagoras, when he went to Egypt, he was asked to do a 40-day water fast. so he could get his mind right before studying mathematics.
Wow.
So this idea of like restricting ourselves from certain things, so the body can use its energy to do other things.
Yeah, to free it up.
If we're spending so much time with all these senses, or spending so much time digesting and clearing out toxins, the body, I think, can't do what it is made to do, you know, which is constantly heal and be a channel for creativity.
Yeah,
you know, like that's.
I think that one of my favorite quotes of all time is by an old philosopher who died in the 90s. He says, our duty as humans is to create culture, not consume culture. So I read that maybe 10 years ago, like the creating aspect. Like, it doesn't have to be on this grand scale. So we don't have to have these like delusions of needing to be at a certain level to create things. And, you know, I'm able to like look in with my clients or my friends, my interpersonal relationships. And it's almost like if I see a friend or a loved one or somebody I care about a lot and they're unhappy, one of the first things I'll think of is like, you know, are you creating a, like, even if it's a workout or maybe doing yoga or writing or performing, I think that fulfills like a human animal need. Because think about when we were in the band before we built cities and we were nomadic, it was that ritual kind of like community aspect of either dancing or singing or kind of just.
Yeah, have you read, there's a book called Lost Connections by Johan Hari. It's about depression, and it's really about how, you know, he was on antidepressants for 18 years, and those antidepressants, on a scale, there's a scale called the Hamilton scale from 1 to 51, that measures depression. So in 1, I think you're exceedingly happy, and 51, you're like acutely suicidal. And antidepressants on average will move someone just 1.8 points along that scale for the better on average. For instance, regulated sleeping will actually move you 6 points along the scale, which is more than.
Wow.
That's not to say antidepressants are totally useless. I'm sure some people get something out of them, but there's other things that we can do, obviously,
totally agree.
Including fitness, right?
Yeah.
So he talks about intrinsic and extrinsic activities, and I think what you're referring to, not just about the community, and this kind of might contradict the earlier quote you just said about
create culture,
creating or consume. I think it's the reasons why we create that are really important. So if I get on a piano just because I love it, and I play all afternoon and it fills me up, you know that feeling of doing something you love and you're just like buzzing afterwards, or you're high. People call the flow zone or whatever. That is intrinsic, because you're doing it for its own sake. You know, that's why you do it. Whereas as soon as you go, what if I do it sitting that angle and I put my phone over there and take a selfie, all of a sudden that's extrinsic. Or, I wonder if I can sell this piano. Or, should I do piano lessons? Or maybe I could sell you this. Or maybe I could, you know, like, and then all of a sudden you're not doing it for you anymore. You're doing it for extrinsic, you know. And there's some things that, like going to uni, you're probably doing for extrinsic value because, you know, you want to get a job and study something.
Or we're told to do it. The system's
told
like,
to do it.
You as an 18-year-old, you have to must decide what you're going to do for the rest of your life.
Right. And so for now, now I've followed my dream to be a poet, but now also a lot of my poetry, there's a lot of extrinsic value attached to it because it's also my job.
You keep
so
elevating.
I need to find that balance. Yeah, keep changing, keep evolving, keep doing different things. But I think that's really interesting. I don't think it's just that we're only meant to create rather than
but there should
consume.
be intention behind it.
But the intention behind it, the reasons, and also I love going to the theater. You know, like I love consuming other people's art. Yeah. I just think that it's gone way out of whack at the moment. You know, like it's out of control where people are literally just waiting on the couch for the next thing to come through, and they're not expressing themselves in any way, and that causes so much drama in society, I think.
I totally agree with there's a study I've been bringing up way too much on the show, so I'll bypass it. But
you could rename the show after
it's a happiness study. It's just it's Harvard's happiness study, and they talk about, and they've proven that there's different levels, and the highest level we must always contain an element of suffering. It has to contain suffering.
Awesome.
Yeah, so the example they use is like, you know, you're never with a buddy and you say, hey, do you remember last year we went to the amusement park? That roller coaster was really fun. The example is, no, do you remember we tried climbing that mountain and almost died?
Yeah.
It's always in hindsight, that sort of happiness.
Yeah. I just wonder how far you can go with that, because, you know, like for us as privileged middle class, I'm assuming straight males in this society, you know, climbing the mountain and almost dying is like pretty safe. even though it's
Yes.
you know.
Yep.
Whereas when we talk about people who are like systematically oppressed,
Yep.
it's difficult to go into that world and talk for them.
Very
and
true,
for
man.
their oppression.
Didn't even
you
think
know?
about that side of things.
So yeah,
It's complex. It's not as simple as
Completely.
Something like cut
For
and dry
sure.
like
but
that.
but you know, the beautiful struggle is an old concept that's been around forever. And
Yeah.
I travel around the world a lot, and there's always someone who's had a way worse time than me, like a way more difficult upbringing or life or situation, and has done like way better than me with the tools that they've been given, you know.
Yeah.
So anything's possible, man.
How long your craft per se? Like if you looking back, would you say, because you know Gladwell in Outliers writes about in order to master anything, he equates an hour number, 10,000 hours. You can believe that if you want. But I was telling Benny Boy right here about how, you know, when you're performing, you could see your experience on stage. You could see your body of work exuding out. How long would you say that you, even without you knowing maybe when you were younger, that you were preparing for right now? Has it been 5 years, 10 years? Has it been, how long would you say you've been on this path of telling a story, moving people, challenging the way people think, and making people feel something?
Yeah, that's an epic question, because the layers to all of those probably have different answers, you know. I studied Indigenous Studies after school. Actually, when I was in high school, I was the only kid in my legal studies class in senior that said that apologizing to the stolen generation was a good idea. Including
the only one.
The only one, including my teacher.
That said apologizing was a good idea.
Yeah.
So they were opposed to apologizing.
Yeah.
How old? So you're 18. What year was that?
2000.
Oh, same age, 1982.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow, that's. So how did you react to that?
So.
Because I love the poem you wrote, history books, man.
Exactly.
That's one of my favorite poems you got.
So then I reacted to that by just going, "Are you guys crazy? Like, if you met someone who survived the Holocaust, even though you have nothing to do with that, you would still go up to them and say, 'I'm so sorry for your loss.' Like,
show
I'm sorry."
empathy.
Yeah, like it's only because people feel some sort of guilt that they may, for some reason, want to deflect all this stuff that has happened in Australia. It's the same with like saying, "Oh, but I didn't do that. You know, I didn't do that back then,
Yeah,
so it's not my fault. So I don't need to apologize." And I saw someone posted the other day. I wish I knew who it was so I could credit them right now. But someone posted the other day that like, all right, then you can't claim anything Australia has ever done then. You know, like if Australia wins the rugby league's nations, you know, you can't be like, we won. It's like, no, you weren't there. Sorry.
You can't shoot, like tribalism.
You can't have it both ways. You can't be like, we didn't do that, but we are doing like all the good stuff. Yeah, we did that.
Yeah.
But all the bad stuff, no, I wasn't there, so it doesn't count. So I find it. I've always felt that, and it's not because I think, you know, it's not because of any extra education or anything. It's just something intrinsic that I've just been like, that doesn't make sense. Just be nice. What the fuck's wrong with you? You know what I mean? Like,
a crazy fact about that, and they were comparing humans, and you know scientists love using the chimp analogy, but they said you could have a specific area of a jungle with 100 different chimps, and in that 100 different chimps, you're gonna have at least 15 to 20 different DNA prototypes. Now, other than our skin color, 99.9% of all humans are borderline exactly the same. So it's like, how are we've made certain, just the color equates in some people's mind and limits
a huge difference.
It's such a huge difference, and it's
well, it goes to how superficial we are
and how attached to history too. I think people like, I'm not a big fan of traditions, and some people, I was raised in a strict household, whatever, but I think the traditions for the most part, especially when like social injustices or, you know, for us not progressing as a society overall, it's because of traditions. Certain people of power connect things to the past, and we can't do that because we've always done that sort of thing, and I think that's detrimental, and I think that holds a lot of people back.
Look, man, I think we could say that we are connected to history, but I don't think we are connected to history, because I think we're more connected to a fallacy. You know, like that the history that we are connected to is
a lie.
false.
Do you know about what's going on in Egypt right now? With Dr. Robert Schoch?
Yes. I just listened to that podcast.
I've listened to it. How amazing is that guy? Yeah. Specifically when he did the timeline from Cleopatra to now, 2018, to post Ice Age 9400 BC to 2400 BC, to where Cleopatra was more closely connected to us than she was the Sphinx.
Yeah.
That blew me away. And that guy's an important guy.
It is, and that history is important. But yeah, just to go back to that this question you asked me about when things happen.
For sure.
Yeah, they all happen kind of separately, you know, like a bit of this here, a bit of you know, ethics kind of came in, and then I studied Indigenous Studies, and I studied under great Indigenous academics.
So you hadn't performed up until that point?
I hadn't performed as a rapper. I guess when I started university is when I started writing raps. So I wrote my first terrible love song rap. First year uni, which I will never, I've erased from my memory.
It happens.
And then I started freestyling on the streets in Brisbane on the weekends, just paid practice, you know, just going up to people, lining up and getting to clubs, trying to sell my mixtape as you do. And
hustling, man.
Yeah, hustling.
Take that. And see, in America, there's nothing on the mixtape. They give you the mixtape, it's a CD. I lived in Vegas for 2 years. You get it, hey, listen to this. You're listening to something, but when you get home, there's nothing on it. It's like, come on, man. How'd you do that to me? I want to promote independent artists, and you just scam me. And so that happened to me my first month living there, right?
That's a hard hustle.
That's like a hustle.
I apologize for all rappers out there.
Right?
That's
Think about that.
That's tough.
They're like seeing a whole
and then you go back to him, you be like, man, mine was blank. He's like, oh, it's cool, man. I got the second album.
I got the next one. It's that version 2. I got the volume 2. So
man.
With because the age of performance for me, because I always equate you know, people I learn from or my friends, I think maybe it's a natural human thing to do, is to see where we are individually in our progression.
Right.
And you know, I'm 36 years old as well, and I didn't have that. Like, a big moment happened when I was 27, and so that was when I kind of started understanding that, oh, my thing used to be that I don't come from anything, I don't have anything, and the people who do have stuff were given it. So I can never get there because I never had anything. And that is, it's a scarcity mindset. It was kind of like the hometown I was raised. Not everybody, but you know, bad economy, high crime rate, that sort of thing. It wasn't until I was, a big one was when I moved, you know, one of them when I moved to Vegas, but then here. And I keep referencing when I saw you at West, is because like that, standing in front of that crowd, which was an awesome crowd for you performing, and then, you know,
the Cornel West gig.
Yeah. Man, we could talk for hours about that whole thing. He's such an important guy as well. But you've done that, and I was telling, you know, explaining to my buddies that you didn't have a band behind you. There wasn't like costume changes. It was a microphone and you. Now, I've also seen, dude, which man, that talk about being up there is just vulnerable, right? And I mean, I can only imagine what that high, that endorphin feels like after. It's probably kind of addicting. But you've also done like music with a band on stage, that sort of thing.
Yeah, I
Where
just
do
did
you
an orchestra project with the Queensland Symphony in Brisbane.
What do you prefer?
To be honest, I prefer nothing.
Nothing.
Yeah, I prefer
it's that window.
The raw. That's what made me fall in love with the spoken word. Seeing Lemon Anderson actually on, he's a Puerto Rican poet from New York, on Def Jam Poetry on YouTube.
How long ago was this?
I saw that maybe in 2007 or 2008.
They had Def Jam Poetry.
You know Def Jam? Yeah. They had like a series, and ironically enough, or you know, coincidentally enough, Mos Def,
Talib Kweli probably,
but Mos Def would host it.
Okay.
Yasin Bey now, but Mos would host it, and yeah, Talib would be one of the poets.
Yep.
Kanye was one of the poets. Alicia Keys was one of the poets, as well as people who were
street poets,
straight poetry crew like Lemon Anderson, Maida Del Valle, a lot of kind of Latino and other, you know, African American crew, anybody from everywhere. There's one Australian guy actually ended up on there. I can't remember his name. And so that's the channel online that I kind of fell in love with, watching these poets. And the reason why I fell in love with it, because they walk out on stage and everyone's just clapping for this dude in like, you know, baggy jeans and a t-shirt. And 2 minutes later, they're giving him a standing ovation. And the same feeling that you felt, you know, like no DJ, no band,
nothing,
no lights,
no fluff.
man. It's just like I come out and I've got this story to tell. You know what I mean? Like I've got the skills within me. And if I was a painter, I'd need to pull out a canvas on stage to, you know, show somebody. Or if I was a sculptor, I'd need to lug a, you know, 2 meter tall block of wood on stage to show you what I do. But as a poet, it's like, or a performance poet, it's like this invisible thing that no one can really identify until you go and do your thing, you know? And I love that, man. I love that feeling that you got from Cornel West. That's exactly, I'm glad that you felt that from my performance, because that's exactly what working on. That's what I've been crafting for like 10 years now.
It was amazing. And one of the things I took from the workshop you had done was you were asked a question about a certain piece of work, and they asked you how much time it went into you preparing it, and you were like, you know what, man, I'm not trying to disappoint you here, but I did that on the step outside right before I had to go on.
Yeah.
So that had me thinking because because when we were doing it, one of my I talk about strengths a lot. One of my strengths has always been ad-libbing, because growing up, you know, our generation, like Bone Thugs and Harmony, Pac, Biggie, Wu-Tang, we used to always freestyle as well.
Yeah.
So being able to come with it off the top has been a strength. And I find if I'm preparing like a presentation or a podcast with a guest and I go too many notes, it kind of holds me back.
Yeah.
I need that to kind of just...
You prepare,
but
you don't come
it's not
prepared.
scripted.
You don't come with the exact thing that you're going to say, but you prepare. Yeah, man, I think that there is something to really be said, you know, to be able to, you know, work like that with fluidity, and if that's your strength, then you play to your strength 100%. Don't mess around and try and create a safety net if you don't need it. If it's better to not have it and that keeps you on your toes, then for me that's better. And actually sometimes when I go and perform poems that I've performed hundreds of times before, I'll purposefully not prepare it, I'll not rehearse it, even if I haven't said it for like 6 months.
To see if something comes out different, or...
So that it feels fresh for me, so that it feels new, so that something else might come out, or so that even if I forget a line, I can freestyle my way out of it, or, you know, like whatever. Like, just challenge myself so that I feel like I'm in the moment. Because when I'm on stage, if I don't feel like I'm in the moment, being on stage for me is a meditation, you know, like I have to be present.
Yeah.
And if I'm not, then, and I'm just going through the motions and I'm, you know, bored, then the crowd's bored. So it's important for me to set it up so that it is a bit of a challenge, or at least I need to concentrate in a way that it is not too rehearsed, so that I'm like up there being in the moment with the crowd, taking a little bit of a risk with the crowd. Crowds love to see you take a risk. Part of which is, you know, why freestyling on stage is such a powerful thing to witness, you know. Yeah. So yeah, I think that's great. Play to your strength, and yeah.
Is the scene here in Australia, like from where is it
good,
getting better than where it was?
Totally, man.
Yeah. And just kind of you did a YouTube video, one of your poems, and it wasn't the whole time I wanted to see you performing it, but I assume that all the credits that you had given and the people that were lip syncing your words were poets.
A lot of them, yeah.
I assume you were doing that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Who are some other names that people watching this and listening to this should be looking out for? Because I know when I put up the video of you on my Instagram, a little 60-second clip, a lot of my buddies from Northeast Ohio was like, "Who is that dude?" Tapping their friends. I was like, "Man, there's a scene here in Australia. They didn't know that." So maybe kind of educate us. Who are some people to kind of follow?
Yeah, my homie. Close friend Omar Musa, really amazing poet, and he's also a novelist and has done a bunch of other things, but at the essence he's a hip-hop artist and a poet. We're kind of similar in that sense, that we fell in love with words through hip-hop. And there's so many... The interesting thing is that Sydney and Melbourne probably have the major scenes, and in Sydney you have the biggest poetry slam in the Southern Hemisphere.
The Australian?
Bankstown Poetry Slam.
Is that why you had your workshop in Bankstown?
Yeah.
Really?
That's one of the reasons, yeah.
When is that one?
That is, it's once a month. So if you just go to Bankstown Poetry Slam, they have a.
You've won these before, correct? Like you've won the big ones.
I've won the national.
The national.
I've won the national.
Out of how many people?
Well, man, they do like
hundreds.
Yeah, they do heats in every state, and then a state final in each state, and then the top 2 from each state go to Sydney, and then the finals out of like 18 poets, but the whole thing is like the whole country.
That's impressive, man.
Yeah, and
did you have to do different pieces of work?
In Australia, they have a good rule in that you have to, every time you enter the slam, you kind of perform those poems the year before. Whereas in the States, poetry slams, poets can do poems from anywhere in their career. Whereas in Australia, it has to be within the last year that you've written something. So I've entered 3 times and I won the 3rd time, but I had four poems prepared to win that slam. And yeah, that was good. So that's Bankstown Poetry Slam. And then in Melbourne is the Melbourne Spoken Word. So if you just go to melbournespokenword.com, there's a poetry slam heaps of events going on in Melbourne. It's probably bigger there than here.
All right. Tell us about what's going on in September, the week of the 23rd. I think I had in my notes you're doing in where you were born, right? September, or where your family is
Where
from.
my family's from.
September
yeah,
23rd to 29th, the Rhodes Poetry Retreat.
Right.
What's that about?
Well, it's a dream come true, man. I just always wanted to run my own poetry retreat, to run workshops completely from start to finish for 5 days straight in the way that I want to help people just bring their creativity to the fore. And we do it in my grandfather's village in Rhodes.
That's amazing.
So that's the village where my grandfather and his father actually together migrated to Australia from. It's called Monolithos. There's like 80 people that live there full time. It's tiny. My cousin runs the only hotel in town, and we basically take over the hotel and the old school building for 5 days. And we also visit ancient sites around the area. So we go to an acropolis that's nearby, a necropolis that's nearby, which is all the tombs, and just all different areas that some of them are quite popular with tourists and some of them are not marked and nobody knows about, and we just take you there. And everybody ends up with at least one poem written and memorized and performed by the end of the time that we're there. It's just an incredibly inspiring place, man. It's just
It sounds amazing. They could find that at if they go to your Instagram, it's the link in your bio, correct?
Right, Rhodes Poetry Retreat.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And one of the techniques that I kind of I remember a lot of things that are important, but is that a common technique in terms of writing you had us free write?
Mm-hmm.
Or like, do you tie
the stream of consciousness vibe?
Yeah.
Yeah, man.
Yeah.
Just get out of your head.
Just get everything out. And then you had maybe people listening to this, if somebody wanted to, are there places or is there a system set up that they don't have to feel insecure? Because I think a lot of people hold themselves back in anything, not just slam or not just whatever, maybe because they think they're not ready for it, or I'm new, I can't do it, it's embarrassing. What would you recommend? Like, is there a pattern or is there a path for somebody listening to maybe one day be on stage opening for Cornel West? I know no path is alike, but like, what do you feel looking back were kind of some key parts or necessary components of that?
Yeah, I mean, number one is you need passion. You need to be writing about things that you care about. If you don't care about the thing you're writing about, the research is going to be stressful and boring, the writing is going to be tough, you're going to hate memorizing it, and when you're on stage you're going to be kind of bored, and if you're bored, the crowd's bored. Like, the passion for me is like the oil in the engine. That's number one. I could say, study this poet and study that poet and learn this technique and that technique, but if you're passionate about it, if you're into it, if you're hungry, those things will come in their right time, But if you just continue writing about things you care about, the lessons will come as you go. Having said that, though, go and watch as many poetry slam things that you possibly can. If you can't see them because you don't live in a center where there are any, go down YouTube rabbit holes at least once a week and just watch as many things as you possibly can, and until you get sick of it almost. And that's when you can start really understanding that, not that you can imitate everybody that you watch, but that there are nuances and details that a normal watcher of poetry wouldn't necessarily pick up if they hadn't seen like 100 of them. So that's really important. And then actually I spoke to a guy named Emmanuel Jal. Have you ever heard of him? He's like a child soldier who's turned a rapper in the UK. He was saved from Sudan when he was a kid, and he went to the UK and became a rapper. I met him in Sydney once, and I was asking him, what do I do? How do I become, like a poet, a rapper? How do I do this full time? Like, what's the answer? And I was waiting for some mad Instagram quote, oh, just follow your dreams, and
Yeah.
And he said something real super practical, man. He was like, do 100 gigs a year.
Wow.
If you do 100 gigs a year, people will get to know you, number one. People will offer you more gigs from those gigs. You'll have more content because you can't just perform the same poem 100 times. You'll have videos or photos of all those shows that you can put up, and that can fill out the beginnings of social media. This is how it works.
He's not still a child, is he? Is he grown?
No, he's a grown man.
Grown man, okay.
Yeah, he was a child soldier, but when I met him, he would have already been in his kind of mid to late 20s. So
do it. Just get
out
out
just
there.
Like get out there and do it. And so that was 2010. Since then, I've done at least 100 shows a year. One year I did 220. I feel like that was too many. But that includes workshops and school visits and panel discussions at writers' festivals and whatever.
Yeah.
Just go hard on the hustle, you know, for many years. And the first couple of years, most of those were not paid at all, you know. And I understand why artists get upset about not getting paid, or when a festival that you know has money comes to you and says, oh, but it'll be good exposure. You know, definitely that's frustrating.
Yeah.
But at the same time, there's a longer game at play than that one gig.
Look at it for the
And
experience.
Understanding that it's annoying and you don't have to do it if you don't want to, but if your local community center is doing a workshop for young kids that have just, you know, like come through some hard time and they ask you to come do something and they can't afford you, don't play them off the same way you play off the festival that asked you the same question, you know what I mean? Like, there's always, I'm never going to be a master. No one is ever a master. There's always a chance to excel and to push your boundaries in terms of your skills. And for me, now I do a lot of school visits, a lot of high schools, and high school students are like the toughest crowd. Like a high school private boys school, year 11 boys.
I was a dick.
You know, like they would just be
Who's
like,
this guy up here?
they're like, I've got an Xbox, bro.
Yeah.
Like, fuck, impress me. You know what I mean? Like, what do you got? And if you can win them over and have
So
them...
you're performing, you're not doing motivational speaking. You're
No,
not saying, do the right thing, you're doing your art, right?
I'm doing my art and taking questions.
Okay.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
It's like a 1 hour gig. And it's amazing training, man.
Yeah.
I'm sure I can perform anywhere in the world because of these uptight year 12
Right.
boys, and, you know, like grammar schools.
Yeah, so guys listening, if you want to hone
Thank you to all
I can
of
only imagine doing comedy. Like one of my good friends is a really successful stand-up. And now I just think, man, I wonder if he would go into a school and do stand-up. That would be brutal, probably.
Yeah, man.
Because it's similar. I mean, showing up and performing. I mean, whether it's stand-up or poetry, you're gonna get judged. You're gonna get people who are. You're gonna get your ego tested, I guess.
Yeah, man. Sometimes I'll perform at a private school, and I've got a lot of poems that are, well, first talk about colonization, but also talk about war and, you know, fighting and peace and empathy and a lot of these guys are in like cadet uniforms, like they're already signed up to the army. They're 16.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So for me, a long time ago, I used to name myself as an activist very clearly, but I realized that, you know, my poetry, helping someone that's, you know, doesn't know how to express themselves, helping them write just like the perfectly articulated line about how they're feeling, or helping a new, you know, migrant or refugee to Australia write something powerful about where they're from, or helping these kids in cadet uniforms that have everything in the world just question themselves a little bit more than what they might be used to. That is my activism, you know what I mean? So that's why my title, I just put my title as poet, because it's all in there. The whole world lives in that title, and that's my activism. That's what I'm good at. That's where I'm most effective. I could do other things, but I know I'm most effective at what I do in this way. So
I love that. But a couple more things before I let you go.
No, all good, man.
Yeah, one thing is something that I wanted to ask you personally. It's about that workshop, and one of the tasks at the end, I think it was a few hours, was that we were expected to write and then perform in front of you and in front of the class. And I did everything that you had said, and like in terms of, but I feel that half of that room came with rehearsed material. I wanted to be like, hey man,
That's not fair.
There's
Come
no way.
on, bro.
There's no way this girl came. I can remember what she looked like. She was small. She was tiny. Sat in the back, and we were to
gotta
school.
watch out for
and
those quiet ones, man.
She was dropping heat. Are you able to tell if that happens, or you're like, man, maybe this is Are there naturals in the world of?
Yeah, man. There's
Like, to where you go up to him after, and be like, yo, man, you got something here. Keep writing.
Dude, every single workshop I do.
You
and
see
it
that?
could just be that day. You know what I mean? Like, could be those
So it's
prompts
like
that I
anything
gave.
else.
It's like anything else.
Okay.
Man. But there are people, especially, the thing is with the real quiet crew, especially often quiet girls or women, is that their attention to detail means their writing is just phenomenal.
She wrote about, like, I think it might have been domestic violence, and it was powerful. And I'm like, whoa, that's heavy. I wrote about like a bird in a tree. I'm like, this is embarrassing. Talking about privilege, Lord Jesus Christ.
That's good. That's a good lesson to learn.
Yeah, it was a huge lesson.
But like, it's but then often because of their attention to detail, their writing's great. They may be sometimes very shy as well. Often I teach in international schools in Asia, so sometimes I go to English-speaking schools And I just got back from Shanghai this year. I'm going again later in the year to China and Kuala Lumpur. And in those cultures, often it is about academia, you know, it is about that focus on the academic. And so their writing can be truly incredible, but often it's coupled with a sense of shame or fear around performance. And so a lot of my work there ends up being about bringing out that confidence to perform and to share stories with each other and be vulnerable with each other without being judged or, you know. I've had one girl at a school have an anxiety attack because she was so scared to perform an honest, deep poem about something that she'd been going through because of the teasing and things that can go on at school. And these things are really crippling society, you know, like we have one of the highest suicide rates in the world. We actually take, I'm pretty sure after reading that book, Lost Connections, that we have the highest intake of anxiety and depression pills per capita in the world in Australia. So these are the things that I see in schools, you know, all over the country, and you see their root, you know, when you see how a lot of these kids are interacting with each other, and it's important to just face it and, you know, just help one kid at a time, maybe, you know, open up an avenue in their life that might, you know, be closed if I wasn't there, or at least just stand in the room and go, you know what, check this poem out, I wrote it about depression, see how vulnerable I can be, and then all of a sudden they have permission to do it themselves too, you know, and that's
powerful.
That's important.
You talked about, you recently did the work with the symphony, and then we talked about what's going on at the end of September. You know, you had Antidote, your book of poems. Do you have, before I get you out of it, do you have any work you're working on, anything that's going to be being released upcoming, and if so, where could the people find it?
Right, I have a new show that's just been released, and the video is on my website. It's called Macquarie, which was with the Queensland Symphony Orchestra. It's analysing the life of Governor Lachlan Macquarie, a very Sydney-based discussion. Some people see him as a hero because he developed the colony, and other people see him as a villain because he also was the first governor to publicly sanction and order a massacre of Indigenous people called the Appin Massacre, which happened in 1816. So that is only a 20-minute long concerto, is what they call it, with the Queensland Symphony, and that video is on my website. I'm sure you'll be given on my website.
For sure.
And really the Rhodes Poetry Retreat are the two biggest things. And then I'm working on a long project, which is a retelling of the ancient Greek story of the Odyssey in hip-hop and spoken word with an orchestra as well and a choir. That's kind of like my Hamilton, if you know about that.
Yep.
So that's I'm chipping away at that slowly, and it's growing, and we're probably going to have another showing of that later in the year, probably in Melbourne, but I don't have the details to share.
Excellent. Well, when you do, let me know, and I'll let people know in my circle at least. And Luka Lesson, I really appreciate you doing this with me.
Man, total pleasure.
That was fun, man. Thank
Respect.
you. Yeah, awesome, man. Cool. Thanks a lot.
No worries, man.
Yeah, so what I'm going to do is hustle to get this